Justice Department will need waiver from Biden to prosecute Trump ally Steve Bannon, expert says. Steve Bannon's decision to defy a subpoena from a congressional committee investigating the January 6 Capitol riot could result in serious consequences for the former Trump White House strategist, but there are a few big question marks about whether he will actually face criminal prosecution. The bipartisan January 6 Select Committee will vote Tuesday on whether to refer Bannon to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution for contempt of Congress. The panel is expected to approve the referral, and after that, the full House of Representatives will have to vote on the matter as well. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has not announced when such a vote would take place. Contempt of Congress is a federal misdemeanor charge punishable by up to 1 year in prison and a maximum fine of $100,000. Bannon worked as Donald Trump's chief political advisor during the 2016 campaign and the first several months of his administration. Although he was pushed out of the White House, he allegedly played a crucial role in getting Trump to return to Washington from Florida on January 6 to make a concerted effort to stop the certification of the 2020 election in Congress. There has been speculation that Bannon might file lawsuits to evade the congressional subpoena. But Jonathan David Schaub, a former attorney for the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, told Yahoo News that the DOJ may be hesitant to prosecute Bannon because of the way it has handled similar cases in the past. Bannon has claimed he cannot cooperate because Trump has claimed executive privilege over his testimony, even though Bannon had not been a government employee for years on January 6. Executive privilege allows presidents to keep certain communications secret from Congress. Schaub said that even though Bannon's protections under executive privilege would likely be dismissed in the courts, the Justice Department faces an obstacle in prosecuting him, because in 2007, the DOJ argued, in Schaub's words, that executive privilege can protect advice that individuals outside the executive branch give the president. And precedents carry a lot of weight when there are questions about how executive privilege can be applied. In 2007, House Democrats were seeking documents and testimony related to then-President George W. Bush's firing of several U.S. attorneys. Acting Attorney General Paul Clement advised Bush that Congress did not have a right to compel documents and testimony from individuals outside the executive branch. "I believe that communications between White House officials and individuals outside the executive branch fall within the scope of executive privilege," Clement wrote. And Clement's opinion, while not necessarily binding, is likely to influence the current Justice Department's thinking. In 2019, then-President Donald Trump used the Clement memo to prevent former political advisor Corey Lewandowski and former Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach from discussing their communications with him on two different matters. A president must frequently consult with individuals outside of the executive branch, and it is well settled that those communications are also subject to protection, then White House counsel Pat Cipollone wrote. But a 2019 report by the Congressional Research Service, CRS, which advises lawmakers on the scope of their powers, disputed that this expansive reading of executive privilege was well-settled precedent. White House assertions of executive privilege for presidential communications have historically been confined to individuals who were executive branch employees when those communications occurred, wrote CRS analyst Ben Wilhelm. It appears that recent testimony by Lewandowski and Kobach are likely the first times the executive branch has actually made such an assertion to Congress. Cipollone also noted in his letter that the protections for such presidential communications include all communications relating to the president's performance of his official duties and responsibilities. And this is where Bannon's case is weakest, Schaub noted, rather than the fact that he was not in government. The real reason Bannon's executive privilege arguments are so weak is that his testimony about the events leading up to January 6 almost certainly has no relation to Trump's official duties as president and relates solely to actions Trump was taking in his personal and political capacity, which is legally distinct, Schaub told Yahoo News. By definition, Schaub said by definition. Nonetheless, before the Bannon subpoena can be adjudicated by the courts, the Justice Department has to decide whether to go against the de facto policy established by the 2007 Clement memo. And Schaub said that for the Justice Department to do so, it would almost certainly need an explicit waiving of executive privilege regarding Bannon from President Biden. In my view, the DOJ will likely not prosecute without an explicit waiver of any potential privilege claimed by Biden, Schaub said. The Justice Department has not responded as to whether the 2007 Clement memo represents its current policy on prosecuting individuals outside the executive branch who are being directed by a former president not to speak to Congress. And the White House hasn't said whether it believes a waiver of executive privilege from Biden would be needed for justice to prosecute Bannon. Biden, however, has already waived executive privilege for documents related to January 6 that the Select Committee requested from the National Archives. If Biden did give the Justice Department the green light to prosecute, and Bannon or Trump sought to delay a trial with a lawsuit, a court may dismiss Trump or Bannon's arguments based on executive privilege as frivolous and order Bannon to comply relatively quickly, meaning a matter of a few months, including the appeals, opposed to years, Schaub said. According to Politico, in addition to Bannon, Trump has directed former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Pentagon official Kash Patel and former social media director Dan Scavino to ignore the Select Committee's subpoenas, citing executive privilege. But not everyone is taking Bannon's approach.